And we are live, right? Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are glad you could be part of this conversation. My name is Philip Ayazika, and I work with Policy as engagement lead together with the Digital Human Rights Lab. We are joined by an amazing panel today. I'll introduce them shortly. But we understand most of you are still working from home, and maybe just a few of you are already back at work. And but you must agree that the new normal is here to stay, and the majority of us have found means on how to just be part of it. As Policy and the Digital Human Rights Lab, we've decided that most of our engagements will shift online, and that will be the issue for the next 3 months. So super excited for this. And this is for the same reason that Policy partnered with the Digital Human Rights Lab and HIVOS East Africa to advance the digital resilience for the future of work program. And within this program, we are running a series of workshops, including WhatsApp workshops, webinars, and tutorials to support and equip organizations and individuals with the necessary digital skills to cope with the challenging landscape of work. In these conversations, we tackle a range of issues, including online privacy. So conversations on how do you ensure your online privacy? How do you shift to doing digital research? Most of the organizations have been used to the traditional methods of collecting data, but how do you go digital in data collection and doing digital research? Still on the same issue, we talk about how do you use digital tools for virtual events, the same thing we are doing here, and other similar topics. So this has been going well so far. So we just hope we can be part of the journey. Keep hooked on our social media networks as we bring you all these amazing things. For those joining us for the first time, Police is a civic technology organization based in Kampala, Uganda, that works with civil society and government to effectively use data for advocacy through research and trainings. And on the same note, Policy last year partnered with the Better Place Lab and Future Challenges, a consortium of organizations based in Berlin, Germany, to advance the Digital Human Rights Lab, which is a physical virtual space that is working to strengthen human rights work through fostering a digital mindset among human rights organizations and activists. And I'm so glad I have Lindsay, who is part of the Digital Human Rights Lab on this panel. So we can discuss more as we proceed. So today's dialogue, as we've been publicizing, is about disinformation, misinformation, and the right to be informed. And in this discussion, this 40 minutes or 1 hour discussion, we're going to be discussing how fake news manifests and spreads with a specific focus on what has transpired throughout COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the upcoming campaigns, elections in Uganda, the scientific quote in quotes campaigns that are coming up in Uganda. So we're going to sort of look at how is disinformation impacting our rights to access information. And the panelists will tell us who is to blame. Are we to blame, or is it the bots? And how does fake news impact communities? We have witnessed throughout this infodemic, we have witnessed this infodemic through, and all of us will agree with me that you've somehow come in contact with fake news, from family WhatsApp groups to mainstream media and the various social media platforms. We have witnessed viral videos and information claiming the coronavirus is a conspiracy. And with the upcoming elections, we are likely to witness lots of misinformation and hate speech, which for various reasons, and the reasons we are going to discuss, but the most obvious reason being the need to play and influence voters' political beliefs. And so for the next 40 minutes, we are going to engage journalists. On this panel, we have journalists. Thank you for joining us, Canary. We have journalists, human rights defenders, we have a creative, and we want to find out how is disinformation brought? What are the consequences and how can we fix it? We are joined by several panelists, about 4 of them. We are joined by Blessings Naturinda, who is a news anchor on a break. Cool. She works as a production lead at Malaika Media. Naturinda is a content creator and runs a personal YouTube channel where she shares where she shares her experience and stories from her career as a practicing journalist. She's one of the leading lights in what she considers a fledgling industry in Uganda. We are glad to have you, Blessings. Would you please wave to the viewers if you're there? Or say hello.
Hello, good morning, and thank you for joining us. I'm so excited to be a part of this that has so many different people from all walks of life, yet brought together by something so important to all of us that has impact and consequences on all of us as we gear up, especially towards the upcoming elections amidst a pandemic. So thank you so much. I'm excited.
Nice. Thank you for joining us, Blessings. We're also joined by Nelson Kwaje. Nelson Kwaje is the Director of Programs at Defy Hate Now in Africa, where he leads training programs, fact-checking, and hate speech or misinformation mitigating work in over 5 countries. Nelson is currently based in Nairobi, right? If I'm right. And prior to this role, Nelson led Defy Hate's digital media and training teams since 2017. We are glad to have you, Nelson. Say hello to the viewers.
Hi, I'm so delighted to be here in such an important forum.
Nice, we are glad to have you. We're also joined by Lindsay, one person that I'm very familiar with and super excited to have on this panel. Lindsay Kukunda is a freelance writer and a digital safety trainer. She founded Not Your Body, a feminist organization based in Uganda. She is also part of the Digital Human Rights Lab, yay, and she's part of the Digital Security Alliance in Uganda. We are glad to have you, Lindsay. Say hello to the viewers.
Hello, good morning. I'm very happy to be here. When I thought about when it came to this was that video of crying throughout the wedding. And
nice.
Sorry?
We are glad to have you. Please proceed.
Oh yeah, and then, so like many activists, I went insane, I went crazy, this is abuse, we must end these parts of culture. And then 2 days later, video of the woman and the man deeply in love. It literally was a cultural practice, but we watched the video just to with us and play with us and what news as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lindsay. We are supposed to be joined by Canary. He's having network issues, but I think we shall have him shortly. So as we wait on him to join in, Canary Mugume is an investigative journalist, a podcaster, and a political radio show host at Next Media Services, Uganda. Mugume is a Leo Africa Young emerging leader. His investigative reporting is specialized in current affairs, dysfunctions of the economy, and policy matters. We are glad to have all of you on board, and Kana will join us shortly, I guess. Let's dive right into it. But before we get to our panels, please note and take keen note that we are taking questions in real time. Feel free to leave a question. We are live on Facebook. Feel free to leave a question in the comment section, but also mention to whom the question is directed to. So if you're sending a question, if one of the panelists mentions something that you want to comment on, or you have a question, please mention the panelist you are directing it to, and the question will be directed to the person. Let's dive right into it. Lindsay, tell us what is disinformation and misinformation? If you can clearly tell us what the difference between these two is, as we kick off.
Disinformation and misinformation.
Yeah.
Information to me is when information is shared that is wrong without a particular purpose for sharing that information.
Yes.
So you've from someone, so to speak. Disinformation is shared with the purpose of deceit, of destruction, of manipulation. For me, there are two differences between disinformation and disinformation.
Thank you, thank you. I think you make a nice point. What stands out is that you mentioned the intention. So it looks like disinformation is deliberate. Over to you, Nelson Kwaje. What is disinformation and what is misinformation?
Yeah, I think like Lindsay put it very clearly. It's usually about like the intent and in the intent behind the message. We find a lot of the times with misinformation, it can happen without the use of awareness. That's why at times we send an email to say like, sorry, there was a misinformation in my prior email because I did 1, 2, 3. But with disinformation, we find that it's usually a form of propaganda or a form of a campaign that is designed with the intent to sway the opinion of the reader or either manipulate the reader to think something different than what is than the real information. And usually you find that with such with the issues of disinformation, usually the person who is doing the disinformation is aware of the accurate information, but then goes against it. But with misinformation, at times it can happen even with the person who's sharing it is not aware that this is actually misinformation.
Right, right. Again, you mentioned something very important that differentiates what disinformation and misinformation is. So misinformation, you mentioned that the person who is sharing it is not aware whether it is the right or wrong information, and disinformation, someone knows clearly that it is wrong information. Right. I just want to, and you mentioned something that is interesting, which is propaganda. I hope we can sort of dive deep into what are the various types or kinds of fake news or disinformation that are out there. Lindsay, could you tell us who is responsible for the fake news? Where does it come from? And what is the motive behind the fake news?
Surprisingly enough, it is mostly bots, robots that are responsible for fake news. I think they're responsible for about 95% of fake news, mostly on social media. Their purpose, they target the fake news specifically and only to what we call individuals, the individuals with a lot of followers, like I forgot the phrase, popular people influence, and those are they target them because then the news will spread faster. No robot is going to target you or me. They are going to target Will Smith, they're going to target World Organization, they're going to target really big accounts of us. Us is to spread the false news. There are different reasons for it. The purpose is to spread the false news as quick as possible through through that person. Real people contribute a surprisingly small percentage to fake news. It's gossip, it's personal reasons, it's political, but with the bots, it's very well organized, it is systematic, it's continuous, it's as with people, it's how they feel at the moment, but robots, bots, it's a business plan, a long-term business plan.
Right, right. Thank you so much. And when you mention robots, bots, I think of Star Wars. Could you, for starters, could you tell us what are some kind of the bots? What are bots, basically? What are bots? What are the robots you're talking about?
Sorry, I can't, hold on, can you come again?
So you've mentioned that bots, robots, what are these bots? What exactly are these bots, for starters? And how do they look like, if someone can be able to sort of notice them?
It's difficult to explain what is that. It's an application. It's performed. It's designed to run tasks on the internet.
Yeah.
So basically, they form tasks that are repetitive, like I said, and they perform them much faster than a person could. So
Yes.
an internet bot, a robot, is just a software application that runs tasks over the internet.
Right, right. Thank you so much. And like you mentioned, it is right. Bots are most of the times more organized than even real people. So it's really hard to tell which a bot is. But the idea is that all these people push the fake news. We are joined by Canary Mugume. Thank you for joining us, Canary. Say hello to the viewers.
Hello, guys. How are you?
Thanks for coming aboard, and we shall dive right into it. Canary, you've been at the forefront of assessing and discussing the potential dangers of the electoral misinformation and disinformation in the upcoming quote-unquote scientific elections. For starters, Canary, and we've already discussed this, do you think, what do you think disinformation and misinformation is?
Well, disinformation, for starters, is information that is false, deliberately created to harm a person or a group of people or something like that. It is deliberately manufactured to do that. Misinformation, on the other side, is any information that is false, but not created with the intention of causing harm. For example, information is created, but then it does not deliberately its intentions is not cause harm, but maybe someone was not aware of it or they didn't know. Then there's other two things I want to explain. One is malinformation and the other is fake news. And how different are they from misinformation and disinformation? Now, malinformation is information that is based on reality, used to inflict harm on a person, organization, or a country or a group of people. So like someone is involved in something, it is true, it happened, but then this information should perhaps could have been kept a secret, but then they use this information to harm someone deliberately, but it is true. So that's malinformation, like sort of blackmail. Then there's fake news. Now, fake news is information deliberately fabricated and published with the intention to deceive and mislead others into believing falsehoods or doubting verifiable facts. So information, whether it is true or false, but most of the times 100% always false, but then they publish it with the intention to mislead people or a group of people without really facts that are going to show that this information is true. So that's the difference between disinformation, misinformation, and then I introduced in two new things, malinformation and then fake news.
Thank you so much, Canary. And you mentioned something that sometimes fake news is true or false. And this reminds me of someone who mentioned that with the fake news that we see online, there's always a certain degree of truth to it. How true is that? What can you speak to that?
Well, the degree of truth is always really minimal, but and that is never what they usually front. For example, there is a picture of the Ugandan. Apparently, someone was Ugandan and was a returnee from Dubai, and he was the first person who was confirmed as patient 0 for Uganda coronavirus cases. So it is true there was a person. It is true he was male. It is true he was our first case, patient 0, and the other information is true. But this is not what they were trying to front. What they fronted was an image of a picture, and that was false.
Thank you so much, Kanara. And that, please proceed.
So whereas this information was true, what they were fronting is what was false and what made it fake news. And I think whoever created it and published it out there on the internet, their intention was to mislead people.
Nice. Thank you so much. I think you mentioned something important, and I will hint on that as we proceed on how you debunked the myth around the very first case of corona in Uganda. Last one before we proceed to blessings. Do you think journalism is threatened by fake news and social media?
Well, Journalism as a whole, I don't think so. And here is why. People actually trust journalists more than they trust social media platforms such as Facebook and Twitter. And this is being taken as a reassuring piece of news that quality journalism and traditional media institutions are beginning to sort of fight back against the big firms like Facebook and Twitter. So I'll give you an example. There was a study that was done during the lockdown for 3 months to show who are the people getting information fast from and who are they trusting. And this study is going to come out very soon. Now, it shows that people actually trust traditional media to get facts and information on coronavirus and its effects. They did not trust what was coming through social media. So that for me gave me reassurance that actually people still believe in traditional media. Social media was at the bottom end. Journalism, traditional media was at the top. Government was second, and social media was at the bottom, which means that actually people know fake news when they see it, and therefore we do not need, as traditional media, we do not need to start fighting to fight Facebook and Twitter because of fake news that is published on those platforms.
Thank you, Kanali. You mentioned something that is interesting, or something about credibility and being the first to break news. So there's that line between having online blogs breaking the news fast and the credibility. So there's a conversation on whether you being the first to break the news gives you credibility. But we shall get back to that. Let's proceed to blessings. So blessings, in the wake of COVID-19, there were lots of wild information out there, especially one certain piece of content that was linking the coronavirus to the 5G cell towers. And we saw media houses like the Nile Post in Uganda debunk it. And it went ahead to also manifest offline in places like Bolivia, where citizens and netizens were seen destroying 5G masts as a result of this fake news. Blessings, tell us, what are some of the examples of disinformation or fake news that you've seen recently, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic or at a broader scale? Over to you, Blessing.
Philip, first and foremost, I would like to add on what my colleagues have already mentioned. Please. And include the fact that fake news or the creators do dwell on particular things like fears and prejudices in society and the ignorance and emotions of human beings. So once they know that there's a situation, an enabling environment for the news to spread faster than the truth, the fake story to travel faster than the truth, then they have their motivation. Once they've established that, they are going to feed on people's fears and ignorance, and then with that, it's now almost out of control. Now, some of the craziest stories that I have had in the wake of the COVID-19, I think first and foremost was the fact that Black people could not contract coronavirus. Apparently, Africans were immune to coronavirus. Now, with that, it means that because people are unaware, it's really a new situation. There's not really enough information about it, and society is panicking. People are just desperate to jump onto the next solution that is presented, and so with that, Black people kind of relax, and then while the cases of corona spiking, so which is very, very dangerous to personal health and society and the entire world at large. And then the other crazy thing that I had was that drinking potent alcoholic drink would kill the virus once it's already in your system. I remember in previous years, especially in Europe, we have had cases where people have died due to consumption of Bovera alcohol. If most of us remember those stories, actually Bovera, the top parts were even banned. Now,
it was a black gin, I think.
Sorry?
I think it was a black gin. It was called black gin.
Yes. Now, for someone to actually spread news that when you drink potent alcoholic drink, you can kill the coronavirus, I don't know if we see the relation between the danger of this fake story and what is already existing in society. And then the other crazy stuff that I had was that COVID-19 patients could get rid of coronavirus simply by drinking aspirin that is dissolved in hot water. What people are promoting is go to the counter, buy aspirin, come back home and have a remedy. But what social sites have, what the World Health Organization has been encouraging people to do, including governments and individuals, is to disregard all this information and until the World Health Organization comes up with concrete information on treatments, vaccinations, immunizations against COVID. So there is that, but also there was one, I don't know if it falls under misinformation or disinformation, perhaps misinformation, when the our own Speaker of Parliament said Uganda was going to be to start manufacturing a cure for COVID-19 in a few weeks. Obviously, people ran to social media to say that wasn't possible, and with that, you see that most of us now started running to the Minister for Health's Twitter account because we couldn't now trust any other source to give us that information that is related to the pandemic. And the only person we thought was credible enough to give us that information was Honorable Ruth Jane Acheng.
Right.
So you can see that even with this situation, at least something good has come out of it. We are learning where to look for what kind of information. And I think that is a good lesson. So that together with so many other misconceptions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And you mentioned something interesting of the alcohol. It reminds me of Governor Sonko in Kenya. Is it Kenya, I think? And Nelson, over to you. I think Nelson is based in Nairobi. So what do you speak on this? What are some of the examples of disinformation that you've recently seen in your community, Nelson?
Yeah, I mean, like this, there are a lot of it. But most of the time that we find there's a lot of politicization of COVID-19 and COVID-19 response. And that has led to a lot of misinformation, a lot of less effective information. Like, for example, here in Kenya, the counties have been installing this disinfection machine that sprays some disinfectant on you as you pass through it. And just the other day, the Minister of Health came and said, like, this is totally ineffective and it doesn't have any bearing whatsoever on COVID-19. Because COVID-19, it comes to coughing and ironic. It's just through coughing and particles. So disinfecting your body while you're walking on the street does not disinfect you if you have COVID-19. So we find that like a lot of counties have spent thousands of dollars installing these machines that somehow is supposed to be effective in one way. And the Minister of Health came out in Kenya clearly and said, like, this has no any medical benefits or stuff like that.
Right.
And you're mentioning the example of Mike Sonko, which was more of a political stunt than really anything to do with response, because he gave some food items, donated some food items to the residents, and then added some Hennessy there, saying like, this is a bottle of alcohol that can help. That being said, there is that is kind of funny, but like there is a lot of misinformation that is also related to that, where people are now saying like, even in places, some people are saying that you need to, when the ministry comes and says, try to disinfect your hands using an alcohol-based sanitizer, then people are saying like, okay, I think it has to do with us drinking alcohol to disinfect ourselves from COVID-19. Yes. There has been also a lot of misinformation to do with government directives. So the government gives directives, and then you find that these directives are misinterpreted, or people take them differently. But that also has a lot to do also with like how the government communicates at times. Like it's this kind of mono channel with no feedback,
Yeah, right.
throughout East Africa, in that the governments are really, they communicate one-sided. So like, for example, if you want to wake up in the morning and you want to reach out to the government at times to ask, what is the response on this and this? So they're like, okay, wait for the press conference in the evening. So you find that this also creates a lot of room for suspense. And then people start thinking and pontificating on different issues that are not part of the plan on COVID-19 response.
Interesting. So you mentioned something of the minister on trashing disinfection booths, but also Lindsay mentioned something. Was it Lindsay? No, it was Blessing that mentioned something. The speaker of Uganda, talking about the COVID-19 cure, that it was going to be manufactured in Uganda here. So it brings an interesting conversation on what happens when this disinformation, misinformation, or fake news comes from the trusted sources. So we expect the Speaker of Parliament or the minister to be at the forefront of sending, sending the right information to the people. But what happens when the people are spreading the fake news? Interesting. Thank you for that submission, Lindsay. Let's talk to you, Lindsay. Let's talk about digital rights, Lindsay. And maybe before we can get to Lindsay, we can all agree that fake news has a real-world impact. It can affect communities and lives. And I wanted Nelson maybe before to hint on how has fake news manifested in Kenya, but you've mentioned that. But what has been the real world impact of fake news and misinformation in Kenya? Just briefly, I know you've already hinted on that.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to mention a point there, like what you're saying about what happens when misinformation comes from the trusted sources. And also that has to do with a lot of the I told you about the politicization of COVID-19.
COVID, yeah, right.
Like for example, in South Sudan, when the government first set up the first COVID-19 committee, it was purely full of politicians and political appointees. And what happens is that you find that the people, and that is even globally, you find that like even in the US, you find that the CDC and the people who are doing, and the CDC and the kind of the national health people who are in charge of this, when they come, they speak very cautiously. Politicians don't do that. Politicians don't have don't have that kind of things, and we see this happening in a lot of places across East Africa. Like Kenya has done a bit well, so they have delegated the Minister of Health to be mostly like 80% of the speeches and the speaking on the COVID-19 response has been put on the Minister of Health. So you find that the information is very coherent. In South Sudan, that is the opposite. When they started, the politicians were the ones who are speaking. So you find that a lot of inaccuracies come as a result of that. And this is something that is really very bad. And let me tell you also, to subnote to that, what happens when COVID-19 started, there's a lot of political mileage to gain from that. Every politician wants to come and show up that like, I'm doing something. And you had these also cases happening in Uganda where the president now posted and said, you don't have to go and distribute food so that your name can be seen outside there and stuff like that. So I think as countries need to streamline things, we really need to allow the technocrats and the people who are professionals to speak about these issues. And some of the, just to put a quick note on the impact, some of the impacts of these things are really deadly. If people are given the wrong information and they adopt it and they move with it, they might cause self-harm to themselves. The bigger impact that is happening in countries, there is people will lose trust in public authority. And once we lose trust in the Minister of Health or we lose trust in the presidency, it will be very hard for us to have a public discourse or even to have a proper election or something like that.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Nelson. Let's move to Lindsay. Like I was saying, let's talk about the digital rights. And I think this is general and applies to the whole Africa now setting. So do these consequences that Nelson has talked about and all the consequences that we all know, do they validate the Ugandan president's decision 2 years ago to impose the social media tax as action to reduce the gossip online, the hate speech, and the fake news online? Lindsay. Lindsay? All right, over to you, Canary. Maybe if you could reply to that. Lindsay, did we lose you?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I didn't hear you of network.
Maybe if I can come again, I was saying Nelson has talked about all these consequences, and we all know the consequences that come out of fake news. Do these validate the president's decision 2 years ago to impose the social media tax as means to reduce the hate speech and fake news online?
They do not, in my opinion, because then we have to start with themselves, I think. As Nelson said, they are the sources of misinformation. So the social media, as I'm concerned, was just an excuse to make money. If you'll just give me a second, sorry.
All right, I think as I give you a second, maybe over to the panel. Let's talk about censorship and maybe Canary and Blessing, if you could speak to this. We have witnessed internet shutdowns in most African countries and even beyond Africa. We had a shutdown in the Ugandan 2016 elections, and most recently we've had countries like India topping the list of internet shutdowns. Is censorship or internet shutdowns in general the most ideal way to deal with fake news? Canary?
Well, you still shut down internet. You are infringing on two people's right to access to information, people's right to freedom of expression, and therefore you do not fight fake news by infringing on someone's rights. I think what the government needs to do, first of all, to get back into the question that he had posed to Lindsay, I think that the imposing of the social media tax or over-the-top tax was done not with the intentions of dealing with fake news, not the consequences that fake news had brought, but something else, I think, dealing with gossip and all. And I don't think that was a good intention for a law like that to be passed. Policy is not informed by such things. Policy is informed by the need to do good and change the status quo, and not really things like that. Secondly, I don't think countries, even our country like Uganda, should deal with by shutting down the internet. I think the government needs to strengthen the capacity of Uganda on how to verify fake news, conduct more trainings, and make information available to them, so that if information comes and it is fake, it is going to be seen as fake. But if you have limited access to information, and then whichever information comes in, for example, if you let journalists cover elections the way they are supposed to cover them, and you don't infringe on their rights, try to stop their cameras from getting to polling centers, and you have journalists inform the public, I think that would be a good way to have government let its citizens access information. And therefore, if an event comes from Wakiso and you have banned the journalists from covering that polling center, definitely people will think it's fake news. They will rather not think it's fake news. They will believe it because you have limited coverage in that area. If Jinja is hotly contested and you limit, I covered the by-election in Jinja East, and it was so bloody that we were being kicked left, right, and center. Opposition figures were being arrested, and that, of course, if information now comes out that ballots have been stuffed, whether it is fake or not, people will believe it. Why? Because the only source of information to the public has been blocked. So government should empower citizens in terms of access to information, but also stop infringing onto the rights of the press by leaving the press exercise their duties and their constitutional rights. And that way we can have a smooth election without fake news. But even when fake news comes through, because you can't stop it, you don't know where it comes from, you don't know who is manufacturing it, even if it comes through, the government's prayer should be that at least it is easily identifiable. And government should be doing this in their own good, because most of the misinformation and fake news that comes through, it comes to taint its image. So it should be doing whatever it is possible
to make sure information is accessed
not only for the good of the citizens, but for its own good also.
Definitely. I agree with you. Thank you so much. Over back to you, Lindsay. Do we have you now?
Yes, now.
Please proceed. Please proceed.
So I just give an opinion about the government about imposing social media tax. So
yeah, sure.
Like a proper functioning government, they would give us the behind the reasons for the implementation of the social media tax. They would consult with the population, the way they consulted with the Data Privacy Act. There were multiple consultations, but some people missed them. So the fact that this was passed without consulting the public means that it was done for the benefit of government. It had nothing to do with fighting fake news.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. And with the suggestions coming in on what government can do, from Canary saying capacity strengthening and consultation, it brings me to regulation. And over to you, Blessings. We've seen countries like Algeria and South Africa criminalize fake news, especially that's news which is related to COVID-19, which regulations some of their critiques have termed as extreme. Blessings, what is your take on this? Are governments doing enough to curb fake news? And if so, is criminalizing fake news the way to go?
Okay, thank you so much. Using the examples stated, that is South Africa and Algeria. For example, in South Africa, the criminal faces up to 6 months in jail. But let's just go back, flash back a little bit to a few basics that we might want to consider when we are looking at criminalization of fake storytellers or fake story purveyors. Both countries, that is South Africa and Algeria, are signatories to the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, as well as the African Charter. So we can just make a quick Google search and see what the provisions under those two are. But briefly, Article 19 of the ICCPR, which is the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, guarantees the right to freedom of expression, as well as the freedom to seek, to receive, and impart information and ideas. Now, as a citizen in those countries, I have a right to all of those. I can seek information, I can share information, or rather I can seek information, I can receive the information, and I am free to impart the information. Now, too, Article 9 of the African Charter also guarantees the right to express and disseminate opinions, as well as the right to receiving information. Now, which is where some of these policies or regulations might not really be effective, because how do you know that I knew that what I was sharing was ill information, rather misinforming the public? How do you know that I was aware that, how sure are you that I wasn't ignorant of what I was sharing and I thought I was sharing something that is useful? A lawyer friend of mine was telling me yesterday that, and I quote, "The measure in a good law is in its clarity and lack of ambiguity." People should be able to know the law, rather the law should be very clear on what it is the citizens should do and should not be doing. Now, if you say, if you share a fake story related to COVID-19, you face up to 6 months in jail. For you who tells you that, for me, I knew that what I received was wrong. I was misinformed, and that is not my fault, and etc. And also, I would like to use the example in Algeria. that once, for example, in Algeria, there have been protests since last year in February that have been going on for, I think, over a year now, and they were sparked by their government once their now ex-president showed intentions of running for office again. Now, when you have people on the streets protesting because they are demanding systemic change, in the wake of COVID-19, even if you told them that please stay off the streets for your own safety or do not disrupt public order, you have your own citizens wondering whether what you are asking them to do is really for their own good or for political gain. How sure are you that citizens not how sure are you that citizens don't think that you're only asking them to stay off the streets because now you are doing the same thing they are demanding for, which is reform your system. We need the right to freedom of expression, etc. So in this case, I would, my humble opinion would be that, or take on this would be that, yes, I might have to side with the critics that are calling these extreme regulations. And probably governments have to rethink another strategy of going about fake news. 6 months in jail for someone sharing a story just might not really cut it when it comes to the world of freedoms and rights. The other question was, the other question was, are governments doing enough to curb fake news? My answer would be no, because I think Canary mentioned something earlier, and he said governments, where he was urging governments to actively be a part of this, to know that what they are doing is for their own good, for the government's own good, for the citizens' own good. Now, the government should be able to carry out, at least say, for example, media drives and sensitizations. You can work, the government should work hand in hand with the media, but you see, this is the same media the government has been kicking and throwing around and harassing, etc. But what I think they should be doing is work and liaise with mainstream media to at least help people be able to spread fake news, because most people have access to traditional media and TV. And then
Thank you so much.
I think governments should be able to.
Yeah, let's. I'll quickly cut you off. Thank you so much for the submissions, and we can all agree that yes, not enough is being done. But thanks to private entities, I understand that Defy Hate now has been running campaigns like Think Before You Click, and Policy, like most of you might know, created an interactive game which is Create Your Own Fake News. You can find it at createyourownfakenews.com. So we see that there are various interventions that are coming up to sort of spearhead interventions on fake news. Let's move to Canary. Canary, we all know that disinformation, and I ask this because of what you've been working on. Disinformation tends to skyrocket during election times, and with the scientific elections coming up, it is going to be purely based on media. And when I say media, there is of course mainstream media, traditional media, blogs, online, and etc. What do you think the situation could look like? Do we, or as the government, put in place the right structures to deal with the data miners and brokers who may influence views of the electorates?
Well, the Electoral Commission resolution to shift political campaigning to mass media and online campaigns sets sort of unprecedented concerns of data protection and privacy. So electoral information and disinformation, when you add that to targeted political advertising, sort of creates or forms a layer on personal data, the baseline for profiling targeted groups based on political beliefs, gender, conversations over online spaces, democratic engagement, and other things. So it sort of, all this is mediated by digital technology that relies on collecting, storing, and analyzing information to operate. But the legal frameworks designed to curtail exploitation often fall short either substance or enforcement. Now, this gives chance to the data brokers and miners that you talked about, and other intermediaries room to design trackers that target certain people with news to manipulate or influence their views and opinions. And also now this raises questions for transparency, fairness, accountability of the electoral process. And it's been evident in Uganda. History has it that you remember people are receiving calls that vote for a man with a heart, something like that. I don't know if you received a call, but if you are on MTN,
yeah, I remember
that call, and that exactly what we are talking about. So people who are intermediaries design trackers that target people to manipulate and influence their views. So similar instances have happened during the 2016 elections where, not the 2016, the American elections with the Cambridge Analytica case influencing elections in Africa also, and American politics. So it is there. So there is need for transparency among all political factors and players about their sources of data and what they intend to use this data for. Number two, we should make publicly timely information on expenditure on online activities. Number three, we should ensure all online advertisements, especially those that are political, are submitted to relevant authorities. Of course, this raises concerns of enforcement. Who are they going to submit to if I'm going to advertise on Facebook or Twitter? Do I submit to Ministry of ICT? Do I submit to, what if I want to advertise in my own local language and Facebook might not be able to detect that? I think all political advertising and campaigning should first be subjected to authorities for verification and make sure there's no hate speech and make sure there's no ill intentions of data. And then number four, the government should sensitize citizens about their data rights with more emphasis on consent. Remember, there are websites that you click on and they will ask for your data, but just because you're on the rush, all you will do is just click OK without reading there. How do they call it? Privacy. There's that statement where it's coming to guidelines and privacy guidelines and all. Because we want to just go through and get to the information, all we do is click yes and then it. Government needs to sensitize citizens of Uganda about data rights with more emphasis on consent. Without that, our data will be mined and will be taken without our consent, and our views will be influenced, our opinions will be influenced, and that should have a strong penalty for it.
Reaffirms what is a common saying of data is the new oil. I think now is the time when we need to think about that. I want to get back to Lindsay. Lindsay, I want you to sort of give your view on, do you think the governments are doing enough to curb fake news for the various stakeholders? And maybe after that, you can tell us whether we have the right structures in place to deal with the data miners and brokers. Lindsay.
No, government is not enough, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. I have noticed that whenever someone shares fake news on behalf of government accounts, those accounts immediately on Twitter say this is fake news. So that's the end of the rumor. Ends. Now what we need is more government offices to adapt that. So in Uganda, we tend to have policies that are up on paper. When I look at what a few of these government accounts on Twitter think, they should be moved to paper. I also wanted to add that there are two other groups of people that aren't doing enough to stop fake news. One is media. I think Blessing had said that, I don't know, media. The media to me is the biggest player and misinformator, sorry for the English, on news. They tend to leave out details. They want to manipulate line. So media, at least in Uganda, fake news, they need help. I don't know how they can help the government when that is not doing stop fake news is ironically social media. Why? Because they benefit fake news. The influential, and that means revenue for social media. So now, over the past few maybe years or so, the social media has been forced to embrace the ethics to shut down or to fake news. It's a godsend for social media, a source of revenue for them. That's what I had to say.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. You raised good points of, apart from governments, there are also other entities that are not doing enough. And talking about Facebook and fact checkers, Facebook has that fact checking and sort of red flagging posts that are looked at as fake news. And maybe that is a conversation you can have at another stage on whether even social media platforms are doing enough. But as we wrap up, I want to put this question to the whole panel, but I'll start with you, Nelson. And Nelson, you clearly, and the other panel, you clearly distinguish between what misinformation and disinformation is, and bringing out the difference which lies in the intent behind. So in misinformation, individuals share wrong information unknowingly, but in disinformation, they share it deliberately, which means misinformation brings about disinformation, or the other way around. I want to implore all of us on this panel, be inclusive, to create a 5 or more points checklist for someone to consider before sharing any kind of news online. So, like Canary mentioned, we need citizens need to be given the capacity to understand what is fake news and how does it move, and how can I be part of the move to stop the spreading of fake news. And I'll start in check, and as I start, the other panelists, maybe you could get ready. I want you to mention 1 or 2 things that people that are viewing us can take in consideration before sharing any kind of news online as means to stop the spread of fake news. I will start. Most often, while scrolling on the internet or reading these articles and all these news, I be cautious that if I find myself very angry or very excited at a certain piece of content, then I have to take a second look. So if a news article excites me so much or makes me so angry, I need to take a second look to scrutinize it, whether it is the right information. And on top of that, I check multiple media channels. I have a list of trusted media channels, of course, not to mention some of the government handles and journalists, to verify if the story is right. So if I see a story on an online blog, I quickly move to another trusted source to check whether the story is right. Over to you, Nelson. What are those few points you would put on a checklist?
Yeah, in terms of a point that I would put on a checklist is usually when you look at something, it's really what you just said, to check whether it's being reported elsewhere, especially when you find it from a source. And this is very simple. If you're on Twitter, if you just search the word on Twitter, is it trending? At times you get a news that a famous celebrity died. Before you rush and share it, just check, like, is that something that is it being reported elsewhere? So that's like a very key information. But also, when you see things, you need to ask your question: am I looking at the original content, or this is a manipulated content? So when you see a piece of content, you need to ask yourself these questions: like, is this the original piece of content, or was it manipulated and somehow presented? And then the other thing is that you need to understand is also, like, just like one before the last, is just to look at the context. Like, what is the context in which this picture or this video or whatever was taken? And am I looking at the full content, or I'm just looking at a few seconds of it or something of that sort? So this is very important. The last thing is to look at the date. What is the date on this thing? And stuff like that. And from a defy head now perspective, we also have a do no harm policy. So it usually implies that even if something is true, that you're sharing it cause harm to people or not. And this usually happens at times when you're doing graphic content or even sensitive content, or for example, someone's passport photo, someone's house details or personal information. If you get it online, maybe that is true, but if you share it, are you really not causing harm? Are you not causing harm to other people? And that can also apply to graphic content,
Right.
Content that are insensitive and stuff like that. So even if the things are true, you need to ask yourself, like, if I share it, will I do more harm or I do more good?
Right. Thank you so much. Over to you, Blessing. What are those 2 points you'd put on our checklist for someone to consider before sharing any kind of news online?
I know it's been said that most fake stories front sensational headlines that are alarming, and most times when we read those headlines, we make our conclusions. But I would like to urge people to go beyond the headline and read a paragraph at least. I mean, if you're invested in the story, you might as well get into a paragraph, you know, for your own good and for the good of the people that you're going to send that story to. So read the paragraph and then look out for keywords, and then just compare that against other sites. And a quick Google search could go a long way in saving you the trouble. And then maybe the other thing is you can also look at the author's background and look at their previously published articles. If they are credible, I trust you, you will know. And of course, a quick Google search on the author, even if much about a Wikipedia page, you will always find at least that they are credible somehow along the way. So I'm not going into detail of that, but those would be my.
Thank you so much. We lost Lindsay. Canary, over to you. What are those 2 points you would put on a checklist?
I would have, of course, tools that have helped me over time to verify fake news. For example, images are one of those things that are spread widely. For example, images of violence, and these images have been on the internet before. So the Google Images tool, reverse tool, helps to verify whether the image has been published before or not. If it has been spread on WhatsApp or Twitter or Facebook, saying this is happening in a certain location, it is easy to put it on Google Reverse Image, and it quickly will tell you where this happened and what exactly was taking place. You also find that certain websites that do verify fake news and debunk them, they have published articles about these very images. So my checklist is always with Google Reverse Image, because images are visually impressive to look at, and they communicate widely other than just text. That is number one. And then number two is people need to choose their own trusted sources of information. For example, there are online blogs here in Uganda that I can never take truth from, because I don't consider them as authorities on information. You don't know when they started operating. You don't know who really operates them. You don't know who is right. The articles are not they don't have authors. It is very hard to tell who exactly published an article. So the public needs to choose their own trusted sources of information, because it is one way of verifying information. If information is not coming from this and this number of sources, maybe it is fake. It is time to develop doubt. Those are my 2 checklist points.
Thank you so much, Canary, and thank you so much to the panelists that joined us. We've had a very long conversation, and it is clear that fake news is a real problem. And thank you to the panelists that have hinted on what we can do. I'll quickly run through it. Check whether the information you're sharing is reported anywhere else. Check whether the content is original. Check on the date and the context. Before you share any kind of information, does it cause any harm to anyone in any kind of way? If it does, then you probably shouldn't share that kind of information. Go beyond headlines. Go ahead and read at least a paragraph. Check on the author's background. Do a quick Google search. Check images. Use Canara's mentioned the Google image reverse tool. And then lastly, take time and choose your very trusted sources. So if it is a journalist, if it is a media personnel, if it is a media house, look out for those media places that or trusted sources or handles that you can always run to if you find any doubtful information. Thank you so much to the panelists that have joined us and to you, our viewers. We thank you so much. We slightly surpassed the time we had talked of, but we thank you that you could stick around. And before I jump off, I just want to leave you with one quote, which I failed to trace where it came from. But it says that if the news is fake, imagine history. So our lives move on history. So if the news is fake, imagine history. What kind of history are we leaving behind? To our panelists, thank you so much. Quickly wave to the viewers. And bye-bye to everyone that managed to join us today.